Okay, so JumpCloud, you fairly recently published your 2025 MSP Performance Report, and I suppose it'd just be good to understand, A, is it the first time you've done it? Was there a particular motive? I mean, did you have a theory that you wanted to test when you did it, or just wanted to find out more? Yeah, the background to the report, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is the first MSP, I'd say, performance report that we've done, but not the first, I'd say, report in terms of how we look across the landscape, both in terms of MSPs, but then also in general in IT, as well as security relationships and other pieces. This has really become important for JumpCloud because this serves as, a really interesting insight and nuance into the industry that we don't feel like a lot of people are covering. And so when we put together this report, we surveyed a little over 300 MSPs, both from the US as well as the UK, just to have a better understanding of what's happening across their businesses, what are the different types of trends, and then for this report specifically, understanding what high performance MSPs really set them apart from their peers across those different kind of benchmarks that we wanted to showcase.
Okay, so in terms of what the report uncovered, a number of things. Maybe we can start with, I think
Mhm.
you discovered that the majority of MSPs are now managing a mix of sort of Windows, Mac, Linux, etc. So I guess that's an interesting development itself, but there are, I think you note some potential security and compliance issues with that. So I suppose, yeah, give us the good side to that and, the cautionary tale, if you like, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the good side is for clients and businesses that are supported by MSPs, there's a lot more optionality than there has been in the past. Typically, an MSP come in, great, here's my stack, here's how we're going to operate, whereas they're taking much more of a client-centric approach. And this is also what we're seeing for high growth MSPs, where they're able to adopt more business and essentially manage all the different pieces that come across the organization. But really where this shows up, and if you think about how people work day to day, it's coming at the device level and making sure that they can support multiple different operating systems and meet folks where they are. However, right, each one of those has its own different nuances, patch and update, and how people treat those security policies. So it's really important for a lot of these MSPs to making sure that they are centralizing as much of their operations as possible, adding in as much automation and some of those different elements so that way they can both support, great client outcomes, but then also do it very securely and in a process-driven approach. So that way they're reducing as much of those security, threat actors as much as possible.
Okay, but perhaps slightly contrasting alongside this sort of discovery of this multi-vendor world that now exists, I think you did discover that a minority, whether significant or not, of MSP, they still report sort of issues over vendor lock-in. So how's
Mhm.
that, if you like, happening when we've got this sort of theoretically multi-vendor world where everyone can access a variety of options, if you like?
Absolutely. It is a double-edged sword, unfortunately, because you have a lot of, I'd say, MSPs that are adopting more vendors than they have in the past. But that's not to say that the vendors also don't want to have that kind of dominance and share of wallet and other pieces. So there's multiple different incentive structures that you see across each one of the different vendor landscapes, and they don't always intertwine as nicely as you'd hope for. So there is an element of vendor lock-in as well when you say, hey, I want to either support, Windows side of my business and go down. There's some nuances there when you think about the different pricing and packaging and structures and incentives that a lot of these different vendors have towards working with partners and MSPs and making sure that they can do that. So it's an element in terms of how you operate an MSP in today in 2025 and beyond is making sure that you can support multiple different vendors, but then also making sure that you can work with the vendors in the way that makes sense for a lot of your business, because not everyone's going to be open and have a ton of flexibility. So it's up to the MSPs to kind of have that burden of making sure that it all works on the back end.
Okay, and you mentioned at the start that part of the report you wanted to understand what the high growth MSPs are doing
Mhm.
differently, and I guess successfully. So yeah, I think the report does get to the bottom of that. So can you tell us what it is that characterizes them in terms of whether it's differently or particularly well, what they do particularly well compared to the peers, if you like?
Absolutely. There's kind of a couple key areas that we found in terms of or I'd say kind of very stable MSPs where you're seeing some growth, and then kind of what are the differences between these high growth MSPs that are able to pull in, double digit growth year over year and bringing that into the business. And what we've really found is, again, taking this open approach, multi different vendors, a lot of this really comes down to how they think about automation as well as pulling in AI to support their own internal services. So I think a lot of these high growth MSPs have come to the realization to say, hey, there's just going to be more of more, right? Whether it's applications, device types, anything else, clients and differences in their environment. So we need to be able to support all those things. But our secret sauce and what's going to allow us to thrive is by automating and centralizing a lot of those different automations, pulling in AI wherever they can help to making sure that they are as efficient as possible. And that gives them a couple different gains because then you start to think about, well, there's better security policies put in place because there's a little bit more of a centralized approach there. And then as well as how you're thinking about different management of applications, all those different elements, they create this motion and momentum that allow those MSPs to grow a little bit faster than their peers, which has been really interesting to take because more often than not, you kind of think, well, we're all going to just approach it in our way. But actually, what we're seeing is a little bit of the opposite, where if you're embracing this openness and if you're embracing a lot of the optionality that those clients allow you, that actually allows you to grow faster compared to your peers.
Okay, and alongside the sort of AI and automation piece, I think you also identify that the sort of high growth MSPs have far less problem when it comes to hiring and or well skills acquisition, which I guess pretty much the same thing. And is that because, if you like, they've got AI and automation, so they don't need as many people? Is it because their environments attract people, to come and work for an organization that's doing that, or is it some kind of combination? What's going on? Why do they find it not such a problem? Because we all know that the hundreds of thousands or millions of potentially empty jobs there are at the moment, trouble with recruiting. So how do they get it better than the others, if you like?
It's really interesting. I think once you're able to have that growth and that momentum, there's a lot of things that feed back into that help, accelerate that even further. One is, I think, is exactly right around the automation. And so this is allowing a lot of MSPs, they don't have to go hire top security talent and very detailed and a lot of specialists and able to support a lot of their client base because they're able to focus on the automation and pull in a lot of those efficiency gains. It allows them to attract more talent that doesn't necessarily need to be a senior, but is able to operate at a very senior level because they're able to put in all those different policies. They're able to manage client environments a little bit more seamlessly and have that efficiency. So they don't have to go quite as high, which is helpful. So there's more of an available talent pool for a lot of these really efficient MSPs. And then you can imagine, well, if we are joining an MSP that's fast growing and there's better culture and there's all those different elements that allow that, they're going to become much more attractive for folks and technicians who are kind of looking at multiple different options. They want to get into the industry. Who knows? They might be looking to start their MSP of their own one day. How can they learn from a lot of those different people? So those types of organizations become much more attractive, both from the employee perspective, but then also from the MSP employer perspective. They have those systems put in place so they're able to adopt new people and scale a little bit faster than they are in terms of having this one-off approach that you typically see around MSPs when they start to move, I'd say, beyond kind of a couple employees. Now you're operating across a dozen. Now you're operating across a couple dozen. Each one of those milestones becomes a barrier if you don't have those efficiencies put in place and you really think about automation from the beginning.
Okay, and in terms of another couple of potential problems, I think the report identifies software as a service, SaaS sprawl, and also our old friend, shall we say, shadow IT, which never seems to quite disappear. So, how much of a problem did people report those two issues, if you like?
It is an issue. And what we found is that the high performing MSPs, they have much higher guardrails when they think about not only device security and making sure that the policies are there, but then, as you mentioned, around SaaS management, application spend, and understanding truly what people are logging into. It continues to grow. And like you said, it continues to function around. It used to be, I'd say a decade ago, it was more of like, oh no, someone got in social media accounts. But now there's so many different services, particularly AI services, that people are encouraged to go try. But hey, where does that data actually live? How does this function? And how do different teams operate across those different areas? And so what we're really seeing from the SaaS management side is also kind of the shadow AI moment in time where you're trying to understand truly what people are accessing, but then everything else in between. And so what we found is a lot of the high growth MSPs have stricter policies put in place to not only understand but manage those different types of environments. Because you can see there's one element of, I would say, your security perimeter that you know about. And then with shadow IT, it goes much larger into all those different nuances that you have no visibility around. And so a lot of these MSPs have the controls and the tooling put in place to understand truly what their total security surface area looks like for each organization and how to take mitigated measures to have a better security posture, making sure that they can operate moving forward. So that's been one of the bigger nuances that we've seen is they're aware that it's happening. And so we need to have the visibility put in place to making sure that we have the right client outcomes.
Okay, and I think the final sort of report finding that I sort of came across was the high growth MSPs, and I think also others, but maybe they're more Google Workspace MSPs seem to have shall we say, a positive experience. I don't know if that's compared to others or whatever, but you certainly found it worthy of note to put that in the report. So what's going on with that as opposed to some of the other solutions? Why particularly positive feedback, if you like, from the Google Workspace experience?
I think there's two elements. One is we're seeing a little bit, it's easier to work with from an end user employee perspective. There's a little bit more, I'd say, built in terms of how folks are thinking about operating in terms of their productivity suites. And the other nuances we've also seen is usually when you're working with a cloud, like a Google Workspace type of environment, they're a little bit more cloud forward in general. So that also means that there's less on-prem infrastructure that you need to worry about. You don't need to worry about migrating stuff from SharePoint and OneDrive and kind of all these different elements that create a lot of complexity for MSPs to manage and serve that client. So what we found is that for clients that are actually adopting Google Workspace, there's these downstream effects of efficiency that we're seeing all the way into the MSP, and that helps result in higher margins, right? Because there's less complexity and friction. You're able to adopt more clients, and there's also this kind of easier migration to the cloud that people are already a little bit ready to adopt more technologies, and in doing so, that allows them to be a little bit more open and flexible because you're not beholden to, I'd say some legacy tech that I want to make sure all these integrations, because really it comes down to the data and the visibility around all those interactions as well. And so once you have that, it's a little bit more coordinated, what we've seen across those different types of end clients where you have the data, you have the visibility, and therefore you're able to manage and secure that client a little bit faster than you were compared to other productivity suites.
Yeah, and maybe you could tell us where, obviously you've carried out this report and where is it the JumpCloud play, bearing in mind the landscape we sort of discussed, what is it that you are able to bring to the party or help people with to get from maybe where they are to this sort of high growth MSP status? What's your contribution, if you like?
Yeah, it's an area that is very near and dear to our heart, obviously, because we wanted to surface this report and a couple of the different insights to truly understand what is making MSPs operate a little bit faster, how can they grow across the landscape and the environment. JumpCloud helps centralize a lot of that complexity and really reduces a lot of the friction by unifying, the identity, the device, and the access across all those different environments, and more importantly, on the device side as well, making able to sure that you're able to secure and manage multiple different device types, multiple different productivity suites. Again, having a lot of the optionality around what an MSP client might have in terms of their environment, and then also for the MSP to say, well, we can actually manage and secure that more frictionlessly than we have in the past. And in doing so, we're adding in more automations, we're adding in elements of AI to making sure that their IT operations are powered by and influenced by AI, but still making sure that they are in the driver's seat as they manage and grow their own MSPs across the landscape.
Okay, so maybe in summarizing, the advice you'd give to MSPs in terms of where they should be prioritizing their activities. Clearly, I guess if they're high growth MSPs, I'm not saying they're complacent, but they're obviously already doing a good job.
That's right.
But I think they're in the minority at the moment. So maybe for the majority in terms of catching up, what are obviously you mentioned the sort of AI, but give us a sort of short list of things you think they would do well to look at, to help transform their businesses, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. First, usually is just to stop saying no. We run into a lot of MSPs that won't take on a client because it doesn't fit their operational expertise. And so we're seeing a lot of high growth MSPs work with clients regardless of what that environment is, knowing that they will then focus on automation, pulling in AI wherever they can and making sure that their team is efficient. But then also that reduces a lot of the complexity that begets more hiring, that makes it a little bit easier, that you're able to close more clients because you have more reference accounts that mimic, either a certain environment type or an industry or other things that allow them to grow kind of outside of their normal standard comfort zone. And so a lot of what we're recommending to MSPs is, have a little bit more of an open approach. What does it really take to work and making sure that you can operate with those clients? And so rule number one, let's stop saying no. And then rule number two, let's automate everything else that we can to making sure that we have great client outcomes. And that allows a lot of the MSPs to focus much more on client relationships instead of just kind of fixing problems. And that is the other strategic advantage that we're seeing a lot of high growth MSPs lean into is how they deal and work with their customers much deeper in terms of what that relationship looks like versus just trying to get their environment into a somewhat manageable state.
And also, is it fair to say that most end users are becoming increasingly, I won't say frustrated, well, maybe it is frustrated, but they are looking for help because clearly, although there are a lot of clever and elegant solutions, ultimately there's a lot more complexity because you know lots of different environments they're trying to operate in, manage, etc. So, managing complexity at scale, is that another area or supplementary where MSPs can help their customers, with what can be seen as quite a daunting task, I say, to manage all those different environments effectively, if you like.
Absolutely. It's on both sides, right? As frustrating it is for admins and MSPs to log into 12 different, consoles to understand what's happening, it's equally the same for the end users, right? Because they have all those different pieces. So, I like to call this identity schizophrenia where, there might be one real chase, but I have 12 different logins and it's really hard to understand what I'm up to, what I'm getting into. And then you can think about that from a security and audit perspective, that becomes a nightmare. And so the more that you can centralize a lot of those different activities into one platform or one place where you have your MSP to monitor and manage, it helps both sides, making sure that you have, seamless access into the resources you want to do. Because, at the end of the day, I just want to hop into my laptop and get the work done. But on the back end, we want to make sure, well, we want doing that securely. Is it coming from a secure device? What location is that? So the more that we can pack up into the back end, making sure that we have those automations put in place, it helps both sides in terms of making sure that you can show up and work, but you can also do it securely from anywhere.
Okay, it's been lovely to chat, and thanks for sharing the insights into the report and your thoughts on the MSP market more generally. So, Chase, appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Phil. This has been great.